Good evening. My name is Robert Begley, and welcome to the Voice of Reason. This program can be seen every other Thursday from 7 to 7:30 p.m. on Channel 34. Throughout the ages, there have been men and women who have taken first steps down new roads, armed with nothing but their own vision. From Aristotle to Ayn Rand, from Da Vinci to Montessori, Galileo to Isaac Newton, from Thomas Jefferson to Thomas Edison, from Henry Ford to Neil Peart. Each of these and a handful of others have demonstrated the voice of reason. The purpose of this program is to show the role of reason in human life. We'll cover a wide range of subjects, from music, dance, philosophy, to poetry, public speaking, and education. What are you not going to see on this program? Scandals about celebrities, sermons from the Mount, astrology readings, or any portrayal of human beings as puppets, dangling on the strings of failure, misery, self-sacrifice. You can turn the channel to just about any other program if you want to see that, but here we'll focus on that one attribute that distinguishes humans from everyone else: reason. The cause of the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and the birth of this country. Reason, the root of all scientific, medical, technological progress. Why? Because here we believe that a little reason goes a long way. Tonight we're going to focus on a topic of education, and specifically we'll be talking about an alternative to contemporary education, one based on reason, the Objectivist Graduate Center. My guest, Robert Garmong, is a student at the Objectivist Graduate Center. He also teaches philosophy at Pace University, and he has taught at the University of Texas. Nice to have you on the show, Robert.
Thank you, Robert. It's nice to be here.
Can you first start off with giving us a description of what the Graduate Center is all about?
Sure. I should mention for the record that I'm here as a student at the Objectivist Graduate Center, and of course I don't speak for the center.
Right, you speak for yourself as a student. Okay.
The Objectivist Graduate Center is a program that is designed to replace something that is important, that is missing in today's education, and that is teaching students how to think. And I'm sure you're aware, Robert, that today's academic establishment is in trouble.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be an objectivist to be aware that this is a culture that is in trouble. It's a culture that acquits O.J. Simpson. It's a culture that where those who can think are routinely attacked, and what is elevated is multiculturalism, group sentiments, group self-esteem. So what we're out to do is to teach a generation of new intellectuals who can come in and change that cultural climate.
Okay, so when you say it teaches students to think, that's a specific purpose, or is that like the underlying theme?
That is certainly a crucial aspect of what the Objectivist Graduate Center
Okay,
is here
in what
for.
way? In what way does it teach a student to think?
Well, the idea is to teach the student a rational philosophy, and with emphasis on how to originate ideas, how to think creatively. So, for example, there are several classes, but one very important class is on writing, and there is intensive criticism of our work. We'll produce a paper almost every week of some length, maybe just one page,
right.
Anywhere up to about 700 or 800 words. And then we have individual tutorials with a faculty member who goes through them
critiques, yeah.
in extreme detail. And the emphasis is on how to make yourself clear. And it's a writing skill specifically, but beyond that, kind of underlying that writing skill is how to think clearly.
Because if you're going to write, you have to think first.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. What kind of student is eligible for this, for the Graduate Center?
Well, it is an objectivist graduate center, so it is for objectivists who are dedicated to careers as professional intellectuals. That includes some, like myself, who are graduate students at other programs, and there are some faculty members also who are participating in the program.
When you say an intellectual, what's an intellectual?
Well, an intellectual is anyone whose primary professional career is in the realm of ideas. So it would include an educator, it would include
a
writer, a psychologist, a journalist, those sorts of fields.
Okay.
As opposed to a businessman, a manager, an accountant, and that sort of thing.
Okay. Now, do you think the reason, is it because Ayn Rand's ideas are ignored in the universities, that they have to go out and create their own, I guess, version of an educational system? Does that have anything to do with it?
Well, it's partly that Ayn Rand's ideas are ignored, but it's also that today's educational establishment is based on unreason. And so,
what's unreason? How?
Well, it's the idea that what matters is not logic, thinking, reason. You know, of course, now everyone knows those are just Western prejudices, and so they're considered unacceptable.
I see.
So it's one thing for the educational establishment to ignore Ayn Rand, which I think to a significant degree recently they've begun teaching Ayn Rand.
To acknowledge her.
Major ethics textbooks today, for example, almost all of them include something by Ayn Rand, some brief excerpt. So it's not as much that they're ignoring our ideas, it's that there's an underlying methodology of thinking that is missing.
I see.
So if it were simply that the schools weren't teaching Ayn Rand, fine.
That's
you go to
thing,
school,
right.
and then in your extracurricular time you read Ayn Rand.
I see.
But
So
the point is to teach us to think.
Right. Okay. Next thing that I wanted to ask is how many students, what's the ratio of students to, or teachers to students?
Well, there are 3 faculty members at present, and we can talk about who they are if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
There are full-time, I believe there are about 10 full-time students. And there's also teleconferencing on a telephone service.
Okay.
And there are as many as 20 or 30 students in one class by telephone. So it's
including part-time students, I
including
guess, right?
part-time students, some people who are professors at schools around the country.
Right.
So
Wow.
it's really a very large number of students kind of on the periphery.
Okay, you mentioned writing. What other subjects are covered?
Well, there's a writing class which is taught by Peter Schwartz, who
He's an excellent writer.
a tremendously good
Journalist,
writer,
yeah.
and who edited published his own current events periodical for many years. There is a seminar on Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, the book by Leonard Peikoff,
Right.
which is taught by Harry Binswanger, an associate of Ayn Rand and a professor of philosophy for many years.
Right.
And then there's a class entitled Philosophical Induction, taught by Leonard Peikoff, who is the leading expert on objectivist ideas in today's world.
What does induction cover?
Well, it's a class on how to get philosophic ideas from reality. And it's very easy when you're dealing with very, very abstract subjects to kind of get lost in the clouds and lose the fact that philosophy, just like anything else, starts with reality. You're not born with metaphysics in the back of your mind.
Can you give us an example of the process you would go through in induction? Because this is one of the real problems in philosophy, as I understand it, right?
Well, yeah, the class is not specifically on the problem of induction as
Okay.
it's
But it's one of
called.
the least understood, I guess. So I'd like
Right.
to know for myself and maybe our audience as well.
Yeah, the idea is to begin as if you were, as if you had never heard of some philosophical idea, and figure out the steps by which a fresh, new mind would discover it on his own. So, for example, we'll cover a subject such as one of the virtues in ethics, the virtue of reason, perhaps. And the topic will be how to discover on your own that reason is a virtue. Now, of course, we've all read Ayn Rand, the
You're
students.
intimately
in the
familiar
program.
with her, okay.
So we have the kind of in our minds all of this philosophical content. The idea is setting all of that aside and all of the words we've read, all of the whatever is in the background, putting that aside and just taking a fresh look at reality and say, what observations would lead you to the virtue of reason? And one of the students will be assigned to write, just on one page, a summary of his view of how that would be discovered.
One student?
Yes, one of the students
Oh,
is
and
on
what, everybody
each
else
week.
critiques it? Or?
And then everyone critiques
Wow.
it, and Leonard Peikoff critiques it, which, as you can imagine, can be...
It's a grilling process.
Yeah, it can be... It can be very informative. And he has particular focus on where your thinking is off. And he is so immensely sensitive to where something has launched into spouting memorized slogans.
Right.
And something that to my mind, when I read what someone writes, just sounds like an obvious statement. Dr. Peikoff is able to say, now why would you think that was important to say? And the person, I don't know. And he can say, well, was it because of your carrying around that certain objection that you're worried about? And the person will say, well, yeah, I guess that, and he'll work from there to show how there's some rationalistic method, which means rationalism is the technical term.
Ideas
for,
detached from reality.
Yeah, it's the idea that you're holding philosophy as detached from reality, and it's all this up in a cloud up here. And Dr. Peikoff can go from what sounds like a simple platitude almost
Right.
to show the thinking errors that underlie
Right.
it. And that's the value of that class.
It's interesting because just from your description, you could tell how radically different it is from contemporary education, because to have one person kind of on their own being analyzed, not themselves being analyzed, they're writing, that I think the concentrated attention that they get, you don't get that in normal education, and I think that's really valuable to students.
Now, of course, we have to realize that we're talking at the graduate level here. So the kinds of things that we're doing, we're not comparing the Objectivist Graduate Center to an undergraduate class where there may be 250 people in the same room.
Right.
And in the graduate schools, you get more kind of one-on-one attention.
Okay.
But here it's from the standpoint of clarifying your ideas, identifying reality with the conviction that there is a reality, And of course, in contemporary academia, there is no such idea.
Right.
And
Right.
so the difference is between, it's like the difference between scientific method and theology. In an academic program, you can get how to connect ideas together with
Right.
no connection to reality.
Mhm.
But at the Objectivist Graduate Center, the focus is on how to connect ideas to
To
reality.
reality. Okay. My name is Robert Begley, and you're watching The Voice of Reason. This program can be seen every other Thursday from 7 to 7:30 p.m. on Channel 34. If you have comments, you can write to us at P.O. Box 1978, New York, New York 10009. My guest is Robert Garmong. We are talking about the Objectivist Graduate Center, which is located here in New York City, right? The home base, I guess, is
Mhm.
here in New York. So when you have the conference, is that with Leonard Peikoff in California? Is that how that's done on the telephone, the conference call?
Dr. Peikoff's course is done by conference call.
Is there any writing in that course?
Well,
Or
just
the individual.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
I guess everybody gets a chance to alternate, so
Yes.
everyone gets.
Although, of course, Dr. Peikoff is a world-renowned expert on objectivism, and so there are far more students in that class than can go in one semester.
Right.
So it's usually over the course of a year, all of the students will have an opportunity. But within any one semester, there just aren't enough slots available.
Yeah. Now, what is as far as academia goes, do you get any credits for this? How does this tie in? Say, in your case, if you're going for your graduate degree,
Mhm.
besides this, what's the relation between the two? Does purely academically now, not to,
Unfortunately, at this point, the relationship between the two is one of opposition.
Really?
There is no academic credit for this kind of program. You can think of it as the equivalent of a think tank. If the American Heritage Institute were to set up a program for intensive study, it wouldn't be accredited. It would just be something that would attract students who want to learn better how to write and think. And the same goes for the Objectivist Graduate Center. There is no academic accreditation. It's simply, it goes on its own merits.
for your own, yeah. For your
Right,
own
it's like
good.
any business.
Yeah.
You decide whether it's a value to you,
Right.
not as a
Right.
means to get
Mhm.
the PhD. And the goal right now is to teach us objectivism and to teach us to think clearly so that then those of us who choose to do so can enter academic programs, and at that point we can enter
Right.
the universities.
Actually, I have to admit, I'm one of the beneficiaries because I just finished with you the course on philosophic detection, which you gave here in New York. And I don't know, do they actually teach you how to teach? Because I found it very clear. The pace you gave in the course was very clear, the examples. Is that something that you got from them, or is it, how did you?
Well, thank you,
that's right,
Robert. I
yeah.
appreciate the compliment. There has been some instruction on teaching, and that is ongoing. Dr. Peikoff at one point was teaching a class on how to teach. And of course, Dr. Peikoff is one of the
Taught for many years, yeah.
And he's a tremendously good communicator. As far as my own teaching, I think a lot of it just comes from my own experience. I have had some degree of criticism through the Objectivist Graduate Center, but that hasn't been a main focus. For those who don't have much teaching experience, there is a lot of coaching on it.
Right.
So that's part of the program, but right now it's kind of the sort of the younger brother to the education on how to think and how to write. And the teaching is sort of a secondary thing.
Right. Now, the Graduate Center that's one of the programs from the Ayn Rand Institute, right? That's how the money from contributions goes to that, right? Do you just want to say something about the institute, how that affects?
Well, it's, yes, the Objectivist Graduate Center is a program of the Ayn Rand Institute, which is the center for the advancement of objectivism.
Right.
It's a nonprofit organization that runs, unfortunately.
For tax purposes.
It's nonprofit
Right.
in the sense that it doesn't sell a product to bring in money. It's profitable in the sense that we are egoists, and we believe that those who make their contributions get back far more than the value of the money that they're giving us.
Right.
The Institute has a number of programs. They run campus clubs. They have sponsored the publication of
Fountainheads.
various books. They have run essay contests at the high school level, at the college level, and now, beginning this last year, at the graduate school level.
What's that?
There's an essay contest on Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand.
Right, that's right.
That's at the college level, and I believe at the graduate school level as well.
Okay. Now, how about yourself? What's in it for you? What do you want to get out of this graduate center?
Well, my purpose is to become a professor of philosophy, a writer, and a lecturer. And to some extent, I've already begun on that career. As I say, I'm not getting academic credit out of it. What I'm getting is the knowledge of the skills.
Right, the training.
Right. I'm teaching at Pace University. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Texas working on my PhD. I'll be returning there for another year or two and finishing up the PhD. And I want to teach. That's
your goal.
Career.
Okay, very good. Now, what will you do when will you finish? How long is the program, the Graduate Center program?
It's currently a 2-year program. It started out with the idea of being a 1-year program, and after the first semester, in one voice, the students came to the faculty and said, "We need more," and so it has been extended to a 2-year program.
More time or more material or just
Both.
more? Okay.
Both.
Okay.
It's just simply there's too much to learn
Right.
to fit it into one year. It's just it's too valuable for that.
So you plan to go to finish this 2 years and then go back to Texas? Is that
Yes.
Is that the plan?
Yeah, I have one more year at the Graduate Center, so a year from now I'll be starting back at Texas.
Okay. And actually, I'd like to ask you on a personal level, Ayn Rand, we talk about her often on this show. What has she meant to you, as not even as a teacher, but as a human being?
Well, of course, I never knew Ayn Rand, so I can't talk to you about her as a teacher directly. Unfortunately.
No, I didn't mean that. I meant you being a teacher.
Oh, I see.
Personally, what does Ayn Rand mean to you?
Well, I think Ayn Rand meant to me what a hero means to anyone, only on a far grander scale. She is the ultimate exemplar of what man's mind is capable of.
Right.
And with the new material that's out on Ayn Rand's life, including the letters of Ayn Rand and some of the biographical information that's just starting to be published now, I think she's been a tremendous inspiration to me, let alone the intellectual guidance that she's given in defining a whole philosophy, and particularly in ethics, that teaches you that you can have ideals, goals, values, lifelong, elevated, lofty pursuits, and at the same time live a practical human life on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
And that shatters the whole dichotomy between being an idealist, which meant you were a martyr for
Starving,
another dimension, and being a practical person, which meant you were low and crass and materialistic and backstabbing, but you could live on earth.
Right.
Ayn Rand showed me, as she's shown the world, that it's possible to have a life of exalted values and practical achievement.
Mm-hmm. And also to be happy, which is really the purpose of it all.
Right.
Okay, well, running short on time here, so I just want to say, with the Graduate Center, do you think, what will it take for it to get more recognition? What's the future of that? Do you see it expanding? Do you see more students coming in and more teachers?
Well, of course, there will be more students over the years. At this point, there are new students every year. I think actually the first class was the largest because there was kind of a pent-up demand before we had established it. I do believe it's going to be a growing program.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that as the OGC's graduates go out into the world and teach, it will become a magnet for more and more new minds, and at some point, who knows?
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you for being on the program, Robert. My name is Robert Begley, and you have been watching The Voice of Reason. We have been talking about the Objectivist Graduate Center located here in New York City. And if you have comments, you can write to us at P.O. Box 1978, New York, New York 10009. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Good night. Good evening. My name is Robert Begley, and welcome to The Voice of Reason. This program can be seen every other Thursday from 7 to 7:30 p.m. on Channel 34. Our topic tonight is one of utmost importance to everybody. It's the subject of ethics. We'll be talking about what ethics is, why we need ethics, and what does it depend on. My guest teaches ethics at Pace University. He is adjunct professor of philosophy there. He has also taught philosophy at the University of Texas and is presently a student at the Objectivist Graduate Center. Robert Garmong, welcome to The Voice of Reason.
Thank you, Robert. It's good to be here again.
Okay, let's first start off with a definition of ethics. How would you define ethics?
Ethics is a code of values to guide man's choices and actions, the choices that determine the course of his life. That's Ayn Rand's definition.
That sounds like directly from Ayn Rand. Can you give me an example of ethics? Like what, when you say choices and actions?
You mean the kind of thing that ethics would tell you?
Right, to do.
Well, ethics would give you, for example, a code of virtues. So it'll tell you that honesty is a virtue, that you shouldn't try to gain a value by lying.
Right.
It'll tell you that justice is a virtue. It's going to tell you the kind of values to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
It'll tell you to pursue your life. It'll tell you to live by reason. And,
Okay.
and of course, there are different ethical codes.
Right, it sounds very specific. Yeah,
Right,
what-
I'm
what you're
talking
about.
in the context of my own ethical views.
Mhm.
Another ethics would be the Christian ethics, which tells you to try to live out God's plan on earth or follow God's will.
Okay. Now, sometimes people say morality as opposed to ethics. Is there a difference between the two?
There is a subtle difference. It's kind of a technical issue. Often ethics is referred to as the abstract science that defines the good, and morality is the applied subject. So morality would be the code of values. It would tell you specifically, be honest, be just, be
okay.
productive.
I see.
Whereas ethics would refer more to the theoretical issues. The relationship is similar to the relationship between physics and engineering, where physics would tell you the general principles, and
principles.
engineering would tell you how they apply in specific
okay.
cases. But generally, we don't distinguish. That's kind of a technical difference, and it's there.
They're
In
interchangeable.
common parlance, it's interchangeable.
Okay. Now, does ethics, where does it come from? How do we arrive at ethics? Okay, is it a primary, in other words?
Well, that's an important question that's at the root of any ethical system. And in my view, I follow Ayn Rand on this, ethics depends on the fact that man has to live his life.
Right.
Just like any animal, he has certain requirements of his survival, but unlike the other animals, he doesn't have instincts to guide him. So he's a living being with requirements of survival, but he has choice. And those two together mean that he has to have some abstract guidance to tell him the proper kinds of choices to make.
Right.
That's what ethics gives him.
Okay. And if we talk, I guess, if we talk in the hierarchy of philosophy, the branches, where would you put ethics?
Well, ethics depends on epistemology, which is the science that tells you what is knowledge, how does man get knowledge.
Right.
And epistemology, in turn, depends on what's called metaphysics, which doesn't mean Shirley MacLaine. It means
the occult.
It's not what you see in the bookstore under metaphysics. It means your view of reality.
Right.
And that's going to determine your epistemology, which is your view of how man gets knowledge. That's going to determine your ethics, and ethics in turn determines what you think the proper society is, your politics.
Oh, okay, right. Now, that's any ethical system, right? That's not just objectivism. Any ethical system, what you're saying, would depend on those other questions.
Right. So, for example, if you believe in the Christian ethics, well, if your view of the good is to follow God's plan, then how do you know what God's plan is? You have to have a view of knowledge underlying your view of ethics. And of course, the Christian view of knowledge is that knowledge depends on faith. And underlying that is your view of reality. And the Christian view of reality is that the true reality is God. And the things we see around us are just reflections of God's mind, somehow unreal.
Right.
So even for a Christian whose ethics would be quite opposite of mine, it's going to depend on the other branches of philosophy. And once he's got his ethical code, that's going to tell him what the proper kind of society would be.
Right.
It would be presumably one, it would be Newt Gingrich's ideal with the theocratic state.
Okay, so it sounds like you can't, ethics answers the question, what should you do, right? And you can, what you're saying in effect is you can't answer that question unless you first know how you know things, and
Right.
you also know what there is to know, right?
Right.
Okay, next thing is, you mentioned values before. What do you mean when you say values?
Well, value, Ayn Rand defines as that which one acts to gain and or keep.
Mm-hmm.
So it means it's something that you are out to get. It's something that you want, desire, need, and you take actions to get it. So it's not just some fantasy that you have.
Right.
It's something that you actually are pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
And Objectivism says that values are objective. That's
Hence the name, right?
That's part of
one of the reasons, yeah.
the name. So the idea is that you can't just pursue any old thing. There are certain requirements of man's life that you have to pursue. And if what you want to gain and or keep is drugs, booze, orgies on weekends, that's not going to promote your life, that's not objective, and therefore, in the final analysis, those things aren't values.
Mm-hmm.
So what really makes a value in the fullest sense is something that is good for you, that you recognize as good for you,
Right.
and you pursue it.
Okay. You're watching The Voice of Reason. My name is Robert Begley. This program can be seen every other Thursday from 7 to 7:30 p.m. on Channel 4. And tonight we're talking about the topic of ethics. My guest is Robert Garmong, who teaches ethics at Pace University. And I mentioned the name of the show is The Voice of Reason. Where does reason stand in with ethics? What's the relationship there?
Well, you can look at it in two different ways. In one sense, reason is the precondition of ethics. You have to, in my view, ethics depends on the fact that man is a rational being. That means that he doesn't live by instincts, he lives by identifying the nature of what's out there. He makes his discoveries by reason. He has to learn how to find food, how to invent a wheel. He's not given all of that by his innate nature, by instinct. And reason is a top virtue in ethics. Because man survives by reason, the main central virtue is to use his reason. And we call that the virtue of rationality.
Right.
And that simply means take your mind and the evidence from reality as a primary, as absolute, never to be discarded, never act on whim. Always act on your thinking.
Okay. Now, if we were to go through the history of philosophy from, say, the ancient Greeks with Plato, through the Christians, Dark and Middle Ages, to Kant in the contemporary world and Karl Marx, we find that there's one specific code of ethics that's common, and that is the ethics of self-sacrifice. Where does self-sacrifice fit in? Why is that so prevalent, would you say, and how does that stack up with human life, with promoting human life?
Well, there are a number of reasons why self-sacrifice is so prevalent historically. One is simply that most philosophers have not believed in reason. Most philosophers have believed in faith, in tapping into the collective will, if you're Hegel.
Right.
So most philosophers don't believe that the individual mind can know reality. They don't believe that the purpose of ethics is to live your life. And so they believe that the good is to sacrifice. Now, I believe quite the contrary. I agree with Ayn Rand, who wrote a book entitled The Virtue of Selfishness. I believe
What does she mean when she says selfishness?
Well, she means simply that the good is to promote your life. There's a quote in her novel Atlas Shrugged where she says, I'm quoting from memory here, but she says that throughout the ages, men have disagreed over whether you should sacrifice your life to God or sacrifice your life to other men here on earth. But no one has arisen to say that your life belongs to you and the good is to live it. Well, Ayn Rand is the person who said that, and I agree with her.
Okay. Now, selfishness, there's another philosopher who is portrayed, I guess, as an advocate of selfishness, and that is Friedrich Nietzsche. Is there a difference between, it seems like every time I read an article on Ayn Rand in the New York Times or New Yorker magazine, they always lump her in with Nietzsche.
Well, of course, you won't read an article on Ayn Rand in the New York Times. Typically, they don't.
Okay.
In fact, it was at one time a stated policy not to mention her.
Oh, okay.
But yes, she's commonly lumped together with Nietzsche. There is a world of difference between the two. Nietzsche was a subjectivist as opposed to an objectivist. He believed that there is no objective basis of values. There is no basis in man's nature, in the world, that would tell you what values to pursue. So he said, create your own values, by which he meant invent them out of whole cloth. So just decide by an act of will that something is what you want. Do what you want. And, of course, in his view, that meant the will to power, the subjugation of other people. The Zarathustra should go out and dominate other men.
Right.
Now, objectivism holds something quite the contrary. Objectivism holds that there are objective values, that there are certain things that are good by the nature of man and by the nature of reality, and that those things are rationally derivable, and that if you have been objective, there is no conflict of interest among rational men. So you far from sacrificing other people to yourself, you should live in peaceful cooperation, trade.
Right, voluntary.
Live by the mind, not by sacrifice. And in a certain sense, Nietzsche's ethics, which in a way is an ethics of egoism, in a way it's not, it's an ethics of sacrifice.
Somebody's being sacrificed, in other words, right? Whether it's me to you or you to me.
Right.
The concept of sacrifice is still prevalent.
Yes, and it's even more detailed than that, because if you happen to be the Ubermensch, the Superman, the one who is of the higher calling, then you're the one who's doing the sacrificing.
Right.
But if you are one of the lower men, if you're just a practical businessman type, your lot in life is to be the blood, have your blood sucked by the Ubermensch.
Right.
So, in fact, for the vast majority of mankind, Nietzsche thought that the good was subservience. So, in that sense, too, it's an ethics of sacrifice. Objectivism says for every single individual, the good is to live your life.
Now, you teach ethics, as we said, at Pace University. Do you ever come up with the standard example of ethics if you're in a boat out at sea and there's one lifeboat? What do? Do you use it, or does your neighbor use it? That seems like one of the standard questions you get in an ethics text.
Yes, it is. It's particularly motivated by that, what people take to be a shocking claim that men's interests are harmonious. When we say that you live by production and trade and cooperation, people inevitably say, but you can't do that. What about all these situations where it's you or him? So common examples are you're in a coal mine and it's collapsed and there are two of you, but there's only enough air and food for one of you to survive until you're rescued.
Yeah.
And those examples are well and good. The only problem is, this minor problem is that they have nothing to do with actual life.
What are the chances of that happening? That's one.
Yes, they're examples that if you published a textbook today and it was read by 10,000 people, I would wager that not one of those people would ever be in that kind of lifeboat situation.
Exactly.
And if he were, the whole point of ethics is, unfortunately, there's nothing we can tell you. Ethics is out the window at that point. The good news is that man's life is not, we are not living on a lifeboat. One philosopher wrote an article called Living on a Lifeboat, saying that the whole world is a lifeboat. That's not true. We aren't living on a lifeboat. What makes values, you don't get sea rations in the bottom of your lifeboat and when you run out, you're dead.
Yeah.
What makes food is someone goes out and plants crops, produces it, produces more each year. As demand rises, he produces more and more and more. So there's a constant increase in wealth. We aren't living on a fixed budget. We're living on a world full of resources.
Okay, now going back to your teaching at Pace, what is the response of your students as far as ethics go? Because it sounds like what you're teaching them is so radically different from everything else they get when they leave your classroom. Because not only we're taught self-sacrifice not only in the classrooms, it sounds like across the board we get exposure to that. How do your students respond to that?
Well, first of all, what I'm teaching them is not just my views on ethics. It's a responsibility of a teacher to introduce his students to the whole field.
Of ethics.
And so I teach the history of ethics as well as my own views. And my views are right, but I do my best to present objectively the whole field. I think the fact that what I'm saying is true predisposes people to agree with me. Actually, I think the one issue that's underneath of ethics that people have a problem with is they have a very hard time accepting that ethics matters at all, because they've all been taught that ethics is about trying to get admission into some higher dimension, or that it's all subjective and arbitrary. And so it doesn't have anything to do with their lives. And so that issue by itself is the hardest thing to make someone understand, that there is such thing as ethics that's important for living your life, that's necessary for living your life, so far from being detached from your life or antithetical to it, that ethics actually is a requirement of your life. That's the most important issue. And if I could get my students to agree with that, then personally as a teacher, my job has been done. And I'm less interested in convincing them of my particular ethical views.
I see, yeah. So you think that by, in effect, convincing them of the importance of ethics, during the process of doing that, you have to be objective, in effect, because you're defining your terms, and as long as they do that, then they're on the right track as far as...
Right. That in itself puts them head and shoulders above the rest of the world, and that in itself is a victory. That's what they need for their lives. And if they want to complete the process by discovering a rational ethics, then obviously I'm thrilled. That's far better.
Right.
But you have to define your goals objectively.
Yeah.
What can be accomplished by a teacher in a one-semester class is simply to introduce people to the idea of ethics, get them to think about it, and after that it's up to them what
What they're going to
conclusions
do
they
with
reach.
it, yeah. What books do you cover in the course?
I cover a large number of readings. I like to have short readings from the whole history of ethics. So I begin with Aristotle. I have them read Plato. I have them read some Immanuel Kant, who's one of I consider him the evil genius of the history of philosophy. I have them read some medieval Christian philosophers, and I have them read a few contemporary philosophers, and of course I have them read Ayn Rand.
Okay. Well, that sounds pretty thorough. And as far as the relationship, okay, let's talk. We mentioned earlier that ethics depends on certain branches. In a society, once we use ethics, what does that result in? What comes from ethics, in effect?
Well, there are two ways you can look at that. One is whatever ethics a particular society holds is going to determine its political system. So if you believe in the ethics of altruism, then you'll have some kind of welfare state or socialist system. If you believe in the ethics of egoism, you'll have a capitalist system.
How about here in America? If I were to ask you, what ethics do Americans use? What would you say to that?
Well, what ethics do they use, or what ethics do they profess? Because I think there are two different answers.
Both,
I
if
think
that's the case.
largely Americans are on the premise of pursuing their lives. I think Americans
Pursuing
are
happiness?
productive people. They pursue happiness. They're independent, largely, far more so than in Europe, where the assumption is that you're a
State.
cog in the wheel of the state. On the other hand, unfortunately, they profess an ethics of altruism. So there's a split in our culture, and there's a split in our politics. You see, today, we can't go all the way and be altruists. We don't have socialized medicine yet. We don't have a socialist state, so we're not completely altruistic. But yet we don't have a capitalist society either. We're not completely egoist. We're in the middle.
Right.
And we lurch one way, we lurch the other way. We're plodding inexorably towards socialism,
Yeah.
but we haven't accepted it all the way yet. And that's a result of the fact that we're living on two ethical codes. It's as if one foot were on an island over here that's moving away, and the other foot is on an island over here that's moving away, and we haven't made the choice which island we're going to stand on.
What about 200 years ago, though? Did we have the same ethics back then?
I think the situation was better 200 years ago. It was a more egoistic approach. I think there was a definite altruist element. So this is not a new situation. As I say, the islands are moving farther
Right.
away.
And it's taken that much time to get to the point where we are today.
Right.
Okay. I guess any closing remarks on ethics that you'd like the audience to come away with?
Well, I guess what I would say is the same as what I said earlier. The message that I would like people to get, if I could live and die for one purpose, it would be to get people to realize that there is such a thing as ethics, that it does underlie their actions, that what ethical system someone accepts makes a difference for his or her life. And because of that, you should think about it very seriously.
Right. Not just take it, not swallow it whole, which is kind of what people do today.
Right.
Okay. You have been watching The Voice of Reason. My name is Robert Begley. This program can be seen every other Thursday from 7 to 7:30 p.m. on Channel 34. My guest is Robert Garmong, who teaches ethics at Pace University. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Good night.